All right, it's 11:32. We'll get started on this campus answer hour for EDI Training Partners. For those that don't know me, I'm Brad Morse. I'm the program director over the campus project. And joining me today, we have a number of folks from our Compliance Records and Training group that oversee the EDI process. One of them is John Brothen. He will be doing the majority of the presentation. Just for some housekeeping items, please type the questions into the chat as we're going along if you have any, or that it helps us archive them, and also make sure we do answer all the questions that are asked. These presentations are recorded, so just be aware of that we do record them. With that, I will turn it over to John. You can get started and we'll go through this.
Thanks, Brad. Can everyone hear me and see our PowerPoint presentation?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Thanks, guys. So March 25th, here we go. So this is the agenda that we pretty much show for all of our answer hours. Today we're going to go over quickly what a few updates we have since the last time we had an EDI answer hour, March 11th. Talk about a few campus known issues and try and explain a little bit about what's going on. And then we've had a lot of requests for a few example scenarios. So I'm going to try and go over a few EDI scenarios, particularly as it applies to benefits, so that everyone can get a little better grounding as to kind of what we expect or how the EDI process works. And then, of course, we always like everyone's questions at the end. And of course, as we go along, people will probably have questions, so shoot them as you have them. So the one issue that fixed in tonight's release is some people were experiencing a strange error that was failing their acknowledgements on the validation. And that was, we had been putting DN 116 in the element pathway for errors related to the permanent impairment segment. That should be fixed now, so that in future, if there's an error related to the permanent impairment segment, it should be kicking back the correct DN. I believe it's DN 78. Instead of 116. I know that was causing some problems for folks who had that error. Now I want to get into some of the on-campus issues. We've been seeing these now for a while, so they shouldn't be too surprising to most of you. But again, just to try and touch base and discuss what some of these issues are and some of the things that we can do to try and alleviate some of those problems. One of the biggest ones that the EDI team hears a lot about is that the documents that are generated from EDI just aren't working very well. One of the main issues that occurs is that the document doesn't have the payment information displayed on it. The way the programming worked for many of the documents is that the payment segment is what displays on those documents. So it's important to ensure that you have a payment segment, particularly with the PY, so that at least we get that bare minimum onto those forms. The other very common one is that the SX, the suspension, does not have return to work dates. If it's not a NOID, what we used to think of as the old NOID number 3, make sure that it has an actual return to work date on the SX, because that's what generates that NOID number 1 form that everyone's looking for. We hear about that a lot, so that's the one thing that we can do to try and fix that part of it. The other thing we've also been saying at the department for some time is that we realize that there are some issues with these forms. If you have to make adjustments to the forms on your end, or even if a form doesn't generate, with EDI, you can't really go back and redo some of these. So we understand if you have to generate one of the old forms that's very similar, like a NOID or an NOBP, and then just upload those forms that you use and send to the employee to campus, and get those onto the claim so that we can see what happened. Another issue that's starting to come up as we get deeper into EDI claims on the new SHROI is that we are seeing some sequencing issues, particularly after an RB is accepted. Folks are having issues trying to get SXs and ABs through, so we've identified that. We're trying to work on that issue. Another thing that we really should talk about that I think everyone's kind of getting through this now, but there are some inconsistencies, I guess, that we had from our published documentation at the original go live, and that is related to things that are really basically match data and some of the issues that come up with that. This isn't really a global issue. If you're experiencing some of these things, it's probably on a sort of one-by-one basis, but when it does happen, it's pretty frustrating. And I know a lot of people kind of get have a lot of questions about it. So basically what I want to talk about is that what we're using is kind of like match data now that you didn't potentially see in our published documentation, is that the SSN, or the jurisdiction assigned ID, or what we refer to as the PIN, the date of injury, the date of birth, the jurisdiction claim number after the original FROI, the employee security ID, or WID, and then also the claim admin claim number. Those are all really being matched on pretty much every transaction. And it's important to get those correct. When you don't have those present, or if there's a mismatch on those, that's where we're starting to get into some challenges, and some people have claims that are stuck, and we're trying to do the best we can to work with people on an individual basis when those claims get hung up. The number one thing that we're seeing right now is that claim admin claim numbers. Our initial issue with those was that with FROI and SROI URs, in particular the FROI UR, when you were sending those claims in, we had a mismatch on the claim admin claim number, and it was rejecting your FROI URs. There is a nightly fix that happens with Campus. So if you send a FROI UR and there's a claim admin claim number mismatch, nightly Campus runs an update, and it updates to the claim admin claim number that rejected on your UR, so that the next day, if you sent your FROI UR in again, it would accept. But beyond that, what we're having issues with is once you're past the URs, or if you have an original claim and now your claim admin claim number has changed, or it was perhaps originally reported incorrectly and you need to get that updated, we're kind of getting stuck on some claims. So we're doing our best to try and work with that. We're trying to get the ability to update those internally, or the unfortunate thing is that your FROI or SROI O2s are not actually updating some of that data when you send those in, even though you may get an acceptance on those O2 transactions. The next transaction will reject because Campus is not updating that data. So that we have some challenges with that. And the other thing to keep in mind that is sometimes confusing on these match data issues is that these data elements are creating in Campus entities that are not necessarily always tied to your claim. So we have some issues with things like date of birth or SSN PIN numbers, where it's just a little more complicated than you might think based on your side of the transaction. So again, we really appreciate everyone trying to work with us and your patience as we try and work through some of those issues and get some of these things refined going forward, so that we can get some of those claims unstuck. So just want to touch base on that. Now here, I'm going to show, we've had now for a few, we've explained this verbally, but I think visually it's nice to see. Slide number 5. Everyone's been asking for, how do we really do these PYs? And the example that keeps coming up is an award or order where you have to pay a lump sum of money, but it's going in several different directions. So what we're showing here is just the benefit and payment segments on a PY transaction, or the payment of benefits, where the claim administrator has an award or an order of $10,000 with 20% that is being paid to the employee's attorney. There's one thing I want to say about the difference between the benefit segment and the payment segment, and I think this has been confusing it's confusing to anyone, but it's been particularly confusing for anyone who is not familiar with EDI. And that is that the benefit segment think of the benefit segment as the anchor to the money that you're paying on the claim. There's only ever one benefit segment per benefit type code that you're paying. So whatever transaction you're sending, it will only ever have one benefit type code per that benefit type. So what I'm showing here is the 500 unspecified lump sum payment or settlement code. That's considered one of the, you think of it as a chunk of payment. No matter how many PYs you send, you'll only ever have one benefit type code 500. It will continue to grow, obviously, if you send multiple PYs, but that's a little different than maybe what people were used to in the past, where you'd have different rows of that separate benefit labeled out on the back of our forms. The payment segments, in contrast, think of payment segments more as checks or like electronic fund transfers. They're a snapshot in time of something that happened related to the benefit, or less common even in other benefit type. And they explain further what's happening in the benefits segment. So in this example, we have the claim administrator was ordered to pay $10,000, not really specified as to what it was, but then with some amount of that $10,000 going to the employee's attorney. What we show is because it's a 5XX or 500, sorry, one of the lump sum codes, a lot of the data in the benefits segment doesn't apply, but we do see that the payment was issued today, March 25th, and there's a total of $10,000 being paid. But then the payment segment allows you to split out that 500 amount that's being paid to two different people. We have $8,000 that's going to the employee, and we have $2,000 that's going to the attorney for the employee. So that's the way that you can kind of show the difference between what might be happening on a PY where there's money's going in different directions, but the benefit is like your anchor and it stays the same regardless of what the payment segments are doing. So I hope that helps. If anyone has any immediate questions, you can certainly chime in with those now. We can also ask those at the end too. Some other questions we had, in fact, I think this came up yesterday at the Insure TPA meeting, is about showing just a simple essay scenario. And so here what I'm showing is on slide 6 is what happens if in a simple essay scenario where you're doing a sub-annual and you're just going from, a really simple claim where it goes from the IP right to the SA and nothing else has really changed between. So what I'm showing is on the left is the benefits segment for a claim that's being paid temporary total benefits. It starts with the IP and it's pretty early on. Please don't check my dates or math too much, but I'm trying to show the, I didn't have enough time to check everything thoroughly, but I'm trying to show the, basically the gist of how you structure this. So what we have is the $600 is being paid on a weekly basis to the employee. We have a week and 3 days. So we have $960 being paid at the time of the initial payment. Now, a bunch of time goes by, roughly 6 months, and nothing else has occurred until you get to the SA. And the SA is considered a sweep transaction. And so it has less data in the benefits segment than the IP had, because nothing's really supposed to change from the last event segment or last event transaction that you sent, i.e. the IP, to the time that you send the SA. So you can see that what has remained the same is the benefit period start date is still the same. The benefit period through date, though, has advanced. And so has the weeks and technically the days too, but the weeks and days can advance as well as the amount paid. So essentially an SA is just a check-in on your benefit segment or any other pieces of data at the 6-month time period, but nothing should really fundamentally change with that claim. We shouldn't see brand new offsets. We shouldn't see brand new benefits. It should really just replicate, or should show what happened on the last event, but we're updating as like a check-in as to what's happening. What I do show that can occur is we have another benefit type code and another benefit type amount present on the SA. And I also want to kind of show that so that people can see what the other benefit types are like and how they work. So the other benefit type codes that Minnesota accepts are just a single value, the type of the bucket that it's in, and then the amount in that bucket continues to grow as you pay more of that bucket, basically. So here we have just Volk Rehab. We know that there's a rehab plan, let's say, and money is being paid to cover that rehab plan as it goes down the road. So that's the SA, a sweep transaction. Now we were also asked to try and show a CA or a change in amount. Now this is a little more complicated transaction, and this is one that could occur between what I just shown, say the IP and an SA. The CA, that I'm showing here is one of the more basic CAs. There are other little more complicated things that can happen, but this is kind of like the one that this is the way it should work. So I'm trying to show the simpler version of it. So what the CA is, and it explains a little better why we have all these different DNs that can be a little bit confusing to the new person, but like the gross and the net and how the start and through dates work. So here we have an example of a claim that's being paid temporary total and a CA is triggered. The CA is being triggered because there's a new benefit adjustment, which is shown in the ACR segment on the right. I just selected Social Security Disability just to try and show kind of how this transaction works. But what the ACR, the adjustment on the right, is doing is it's reducing by $50 the net weekly amount and the benefit for temporary total on the left. If there were multiple benefits or multiple ACRs, we understand this because S050 means Social Security Disability is being taken on the temporary total, which many of you know is the code 050. The important thing is that it changes the net weekly amount and the net weekly amount effective date. It also makes it more complicated to understand the weeks and the days, but that's okay because this is just how it works. And of course, the amount paid continues to advance with those ACRs. Now, adjustments or credits are both categories that move the net weekly amount up or down. Most of them for Minnesota are down, but there are a couple that also go up. Redistributions, which are also in the ACR segment, do not actually affect the net or the net weekly amount, although I do believe our edits accept redistributions in the same format and with a CA, just because we think it's easier to do that. So you can send redistributions in a similar manner, although they would not, like I'm showing in the yellow and the pink, it would not affect those net weekly amount or effective dates. So I hope those scenarios helped a little bit. I'm also showing our Campus Central webpage where all of our updates come in. If anyone has questions, that's always a good stop to head to. We'll of course have this meeting as well as some of our materials available later on. And so let's get to questions. Okay, I'm going to try and answer Kathy's question about withheld attorney's fees. So I kind of tried to address this yesterday, and let's go back. Hopefully I can show this. So right now we're still in a workaround situation with withheld attorney's fees. So if you're currently withholding 20% of attorney's fees, let's say you know it right off the bat and you're doing it on an IP, what would occur is that because of our edits, your gross and net would still stay the same. So if let's say let's say your gross is $600, your gross and net would be the same. But if you're taking that 20% offset, the benefit amount paid would reflect that you're paying less 20%. We appreciate it if you can send like an NT or upload a document telling us that you're actually taking withheld fees. But for now, that's what we'll have to do. If anyone's looking at the current IA documentation that's been published this year, you'll see you'll see the two new values about withheld attorney's fees. We can't actually implement those right now because we're in the Accord standard. We'll have to wait until we get to the IA's XML standard to implement those. I understand that's a little bit confusing, but for now, you'll just it'll sort of be the hidden adjustment that you're taking that we won't see. And then once you're paying withheld attorney's fees, those would work in the same manner as I showed PY. You would simply show that you're paying a 500 amount, you're issuing it to the employee's attorney, or potentially right back to the employee, and the payment segment would kind of explain what's happening with those withheld attorney's fees. Yeah, Steve. So what happens if there are multiple adjustments credits? Is each one reported separately with their own? Yes. I don't know that that's going to happen too often. I think the most common one is probably going to be the COLA. If you have a COLA plus also taking some of those offsets against it. Yeah, we can get into that, but I think you understand the structure now. If you can put those different ACRs in and then reference them back to the benefit that you're offsetting against, that's essentially how you do it. So you should be able to have as many as you need to have in there. But again, the other thing is that you can only have one adjustment per each benefit type. So if you're if you're taking all of your adjustments and credits against, say, temp total, you're not going to have, say, three versions of the adjustment referencing back to of the same adjustment code back to temp total. We only have one, for instance. So I hope that helps. John Weatra. So how do we report if benefits are continuing, but a 176645 escalation has occurred? I'm not recalling, John, what the 176645 escalation is. So I'm not sure if it matches one of the values that we can take. Let me get back to you on that. I have to figure out which value that would be. Okay, so settlements with RORAF heat and fees. No, so here's the one that's always been confusing, and I keep saying we're all in good company on this because the 3.1 standard is a little bit confusing. We all thought that 340 could be used in different ways, but essentially when I showed the other benefit code, now all heat and RORAF cost disbursements, they're all lumped into one of the other benefit type codes, which is 340. And you would just add the total amount paid under that one OBT. And that OBT doesn't show up, and it's not supposed to go on the payment segment. So it just is what it is. At some point, someday, we may try and get the other benefit type into the documents if that's the concern. Otherwise, you'll have to break those out on your own to show the differences if it's Heaton or RORAF or what the old categories that we used to have are. We just don't have that in the IA standard. So unfortunately, that's where we're at. Kristen's also asking, can we populate the narrative field in the IP indicating where the, that's a great idea. Kristen, I wish we could use the narrative field for all transactions, but per the standard, the narrative field is really only supposed to be used for the NT transaction. So unfortunately, we can't use that on all transactions, but I think that's a great idea. And if you want to propose that to the IA, I support that. In fact, that's something Minnesota tried to do once upon a time. We tried to have the narrative apply to pretty much all transactions, but it didn't work. So. Okay, does anyone else have more questions? If you have a complicated question that's hard to ask, you can always come off mute as well. Yeah, Lonnie's asking, will the notice of benefit payment form be updated to populate the pay names? It currently shows the breakdown of payment amounts, but yeah, so that's an item I believe that's been logged, and another number of different ways that yes. We're looking at adding the names of the payees to that, as well as probably having both benefit and payment segments present, just to make it as clear as possible with that form what's happening. Great suggestion. Yeah, and Lonnie is also asking names on the NLPLD after the IP is filed. Yeah, well, I'd have to look I thought we also have an item for that as well, trying to put names on versus the company name. So that's also something we're looking into doing. I think that would be helpful for you guys. Again, if that's something that you want to update, add additional information when it comes back to you, that's certainly acceptable. Oh, okay, yeah. So COLAs, yeah. So the COLA adjustment is one of the adjustments, and it can increase. So that will be one of the most common ones that John asked about, that you will get to be a little more complicated because you're adjusting things up and down. So you guys are doing all the math. Once you understand how it needs to be structured, you can see how the adjustments and credits can affect the benefit segment to alter those amounts that are getting paid on a weekly basis. Okay, we have the question, what do we file when paying PPD and it's completed? So it's a little bit depends. So if PPD is being paid on a weekly basis, the way you basically have to do it is you have to suspend it. And typically that's going to be, or probably always, the SX transaction to suspend the weekly benefits. If you've paid it in a lump sum, then it's probably a PY, and that's just it. That's the only thing you can do EDI wise. When you're paying PPD, we always appreciate that you can fill out the PPD web form, and that explains a little further, like what you're paying it under, a little more detail. But when it's done, I don't believe we have anything else that needs to be filed once that's completed other than the transaction. Yeah, so Amber's asking, so if anyone is not receiving forms from EDI transactions directly back through the FTP, you're either an e-form submitter or you're probably your vendor or someone is not actually handing them off to you, because we should be sending those through. And if you're not receiving them, please let us know. We zip up and send back the forms related to EDI transactions on a batch by batch basis. So if you load, say, one batch of EDI transactions a day, you should get back a zip file that same day of all the forms that are generated from EDI transactions. So yeah. If we file the PPD in a lump sum but not as a 500 code, would we still file on the PY and SX? So let me talk a little bit about the other 500 codes. So if you're paying PPD in a lump sum, that should be, we refer to them as the 5XX codes, but really what 500 and above is they're to signify that it's a lump sum payment of a benefit type. So for PPD, the lump sum code is 530. So if you're paying, let's say you're just decided to pay the one lump sum of PPD, you would use the 530 code on, say, the PY, and you would send it that way. If you're paying PPD on a weekly basis, and for some reason you would stop paying the weekly basis and then pay a lump sum, I think it would be most appropriate to do an SX and then a PY. So you'd stop the 030 benefits being paid on a weekly basis, and then issue a PY with a 530 lump code of PPD, completing it that way. So Amber's asking, besides the FTP, would the forms also get emailed? I didn't think that was going to occur. I'd have to look into that and see if that's something that, other than the e-filer, I don't think any email with a form would be sent out, but I can look into that though. PPD, yeah, so technically I think you can still send the non-500 codes on PYs as lump sums. I don't believe our edits would reject those, so that is an option. It's a little cleaner perhaps to have lump sums paid on the 5XXs versus the say 030, 050, 070, for PPD, temp total, temp partial. And Wendy asks, yeah, if you're, generally, if you guys are having any issues, please do email our EDI email address, the dli.edi@state.mn.us. We'd appreciate any issues you might be having. So yeah, if you're not getting back documents through the FTP, that could be something that's going on with your vendor, or it's either the way that you file, or potentially we have had some glitches in the past where people aren't getting those. So please let us know if it's more than a few days and you haven't received what you think you should be getting, then definitely reach out to us and we can dig into that. Okay, so John is asking a complex question. So where a settlement includes closeout of rehab and or medical, how do we appropriately apportion the payments when reporting to DLI? So that's a complicated issue. So there aren't a lot of codes that we do have 501 to report, say, a settlement of medical. 500 could, in theory, cover one or both of those. I think it's kind of left up to you guys as to what you're doing. If you need to, these don't fall into the normal category of sort of completing a claim that's in pure indemnity. So it's questionable whether or not you absolutely have to report that to us. But I understand sometimes it's clear to report that final settlement. So 500 always definitely works. That's kind of the catch-all code to report a settlement or an award order. But we also have some of those other codes like 501 for medical. Yeah, so if you file an SX to end PPD weekly benefits, will a NOID form generate? Yes, it would. I believe it would. Well, okay, so like I had said at the beginning of the presentation, it depends on whether or not there's a actual return to work date. So if you didn't put an actual return to work date, it would not generate the form, but if you did, it would. Yeah, so Megan's question, do you file an IP to start PPD weekly payments? You can. I mean, if the one and only thing you're paying is PPD on a weekly basis, you could file the IP and start paying 030 PPD payments on a weekly basis, definitely. Yeah, so if you're not getting the forms returned from the department, and so let me just take a second to talk about this. So I don't know if everyone's completely aware of what, you know, essentially the project has made available to everyone on the claim administrator side. Now, when you send EDI transactions and they accept, we have our batch of different transactions that create documents. And we send, if for everyone sending pure EDI, we send those zip files full of PDF documents back to the sender through the FTP. So you could essentially, without touching campus, get all those PDFs back right away. And not ever have to go in and find claims and find documents. We also have available, and not many have taken us up on this. You can also send filings through the FTP to campus without ever having, in a similar fashion, without ever having to get into campus to do those filings. And so if you're interested in those kind of things, or you need to explore, figure out whether it's working right or whatnot, you can always get in touch with us. And we'll try and walk through that process to make sure that as a trading partner, you guys are set up the way you want to and how it works for your business, and try and capture some of the efficiencies that campus has tried to set up for you. Are we required to serve the SX when PPD ends? Let me get back to you. That's a question I want a little more conference on. So we'll try and get a definite answer to that. It's a little different, obviously, than it was in the past. So let's get back to that one. Let's take that as a. We'll get back to you by the next answer hour on that. Oh, so the FTP is just a pure. It stands for file transfer protocol. It is think of it as the technical way of sending and receiving the documents through through and into campus. It's the way the EDI transactions work for those who aren't otherwise e-filers. Your IT would be able to answer more if you want additional details. Yeah. Okay, so does anyone else have more questions? Anyone from our team on DLI side have any to add? Again, I think Brad can add if he's still with us, but we're on a 2-week basis, rotating basis for our releases. We do have one that I showed was a little bit limited on the EDI side, but there are additional things that are being implemented tonight. And then again, we'll do that, I believe, in another 2 weeks. So that's kind of the staggering of the campus updates that are going out. So if you're looking for something, a fix or something that has to happen, that'll be in a 2-week rolling basis. Okay, well, we're kind of getting past our half-hour time today. If anyone has anything else more, if not, we'll tentatively do this again in 2 weeks. Um, So if you have anything in the meantime that you need to have answered, you can always contact us again at dli.edi@state.mn.us. Shoot us questions or concerns or feedback you might have. Otherwise, you can certainly save up some of your questions for our next EDI answer hour, and we'll try and tackle them for you. The great questions on the scenarios. I hope these help. I'll try and get Darcy to put this out along with our video once that's ready. And great questions.